None of you can solve this. And that includes the little black girl. Someone let wander in off the street.
Professor Harrison Wilson walked down the aisle.
You, yes. You in the cheap pink sweater.
This is Harvard. This is for the top minds on Earth. Not janitors' kids. Go home, find a coloring book.
He stopped at her desk. He picked up her yellow pencil between two fingers, like it was diseased. He held it high so the whole room could see. Then he dropped it. The pencil hit the desk, rolled and fell to the floor. The room laughed. His teaching assistant laughed loudest. The little black girl did not cry. She bent down, picked up the pencil, and placed it straight. Then she looked at the board. Have you ever watched a grown man decide a 10-year-old black child didn't belong before she had said a word? Yeah, that pencil hitting the floor. That tiny, ordinary sound, it stuck with me for 3 days. 3 days. I'm Kane Uncovers, and I dig up the stories the polished people in polished rooms want buried. This one? They almost got away with it. Twice. Science Center Hall B sits in the heart of Harvard's campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The room is old. The wood is darker than the students who polish the floors at night. The seats climb upward in tight rows, like a small arena. Up front, there is a long green chalkboard that stretches the full length of the wall. And for 32 years, one man has owned that chalkboard every Friday morning. His name is Professor Harrison Wilson. He is 64 years old. He has written 3 books on a branch of mathematics most people cannot spell. He has appeared on public television. He has advised presidential commissions on education. The walls of his office carry framed letters from 2 Nobel laureates. Around campus, the graduate students have given him a nickname. They call him the Gatekeeper. And on the first Friday of every semester, he performs a ritual. He writes a problem on the board. He says no student has ever solved it. He says this with a smile. Then he gives the class 20 minutes to try. And when 20 minutes pass, and every pencil in the room has gone still, he turns around and says, as expected. He does this to filter out what he calls the dreamers, because his seminar, Math 213, is the prerequisite for 3 of Harvard's most prestigious fellowships. Pass it, and your career cracks open. Fail it, and the department politely suggests you try an easier path. Every student in the room on this particular Friday knew that. Every single one. Now meet the girl in the pink sweater. Her name is Naomi Young. She is 10 years old. She is in the 5th grade at a public school in Boston. Her mother, Rosalind Young, works the night shift as a nurse at Boston General. Her father, Nathaniel Young, was a mathematician. He passed away from cancer when Naomi was 6. Before he died, he taught his daughter math the way other fathers teach their daughters fairy tales. He left her a leather notebook, brown and worn at the edges, filled with his own handwritten problems and solutions. Naomi carries it with her everywhere. She has never opened it in public. So why is she at Harvard on a Friday morning? 3 months earlier, a teacher at her elementary school quietly submitted Naomi's work to a national mathematics Olympiad. Naomi scored higher than any child in her age group had scored in the previous 12 years. The result crossed the desk of Professor Eleanor Anderson, the chair of the Harvard Mathematics Department, who runs a program called Young Scholars Observation. It invites gifted children from underserved schools to observe advanced classes. Professor Anderson signed the invitation herself. She did not consult Wilson. She did not think she had to. Rosalind took a rare day off from work. She wore her best blouse. She held her daughter's hand all the way down the aisle, and then she took her seat in the very back row so Naomi could sit in the middle, where her father had once told her the best students always sit. Because the best students, he said, want to be seen. And so the small signals began, the way they always do. Bradley Davis, Wilson's teaching assistant, looked up as mother and daughter walked in. He smiled a polite smile. "Excuse me, ladies, I think you're lost. The restrooms are downstairs and the public tour starts in the atrium." Rosalind quietly showed him the invitation letter, signed by Professor Anderson. Bradley read it twice. He handed it back without apologizing. A graduate student in the second row moved her handbag off the chair next to her without a word, like she was making space for a stranger she did not want to touch. Another student muttered something to her neighbor that made them both laugh under their breath. When Professor Wilson arrived, he walked straight to the board. Professor Anderson, who had come to observe, introduced the visiting child. Wilson did not turn around. "Charming," he said, loud enough for the room. "It's nursery school day at Harvard, I see." A few students laughed. Bradley laughed the loudest. The invitation letter from Professor Anderson sat on the desk in front of Naomi, untouched. Naomi did not look at her mother. She opened her father's notebook, just a crack, just enough to see the first page. Then she closed it. And up on the long green chalkboard, the gatekeeper picked up a fresh stick of chalk. What did he write that made an entire room of doctoral students go silent? The piece of chalk in Professor Wilson's hand moved across the board in one long, unbroken stream. He wrote from memory. He had written this problem so many times he could do it in his sleep. It was an expression involving nested sums, a function defined in pieces, and a constraint written in elegant script at the bottom corner. When he finished, he stepped back. He let the room look at it. He let it do its work. The room went quiet, in the way only a Harvard lecture hall can go quiet. Pencils paused. Laptops stopped clicking. Somebody in the third row exhaled slowly. The problem on the board looked, at first glance, like a monster. It was the kind of thing that seemed to demand pages and pages of heavy technique, the kind of thing that made first-year doctoral students wonder if they belonged in the room. Professor Wilson turned around with his hands behind his back. His voice was calm and almost fatherly, which made it worse. "This problem has been part of my curriculum for 32 years. In that time, roughly 1,200 students have sat where you are sitting. None of them solved it. I do not expect that record to break today. I expect it to stand. You have 20 minutes. Consider this a lesson in humility." He turned one more time, now facing the far corner of the room, facing Naomi. He smiled a small, cold smile. "And the little one in the pink sweater. You can color, or draw, or whatever it is 10-year-olds do when the grown-ups are working. Nobody will be upset if you fall asleep." A few students laughed again, not as loud this time. Something in the room had started to shift, though most of them could not yet name it. In the back row, Rosalind Young's knuckles went white on her armrest. She began to stand. She was going to walk down the aisle and take her daughter home. But under the desk, Naomi's small hand found her mother's leg. Naomi did not turn around. She just pressed her palm to her mother's knee once, firmly. It said, in a language only mothers speak, "I am fine." "Please sit down." Rosalind sat down. Her eyes did not leave the back of Wilson's head. The 20-minute clock on the wall began to count down. For the first 8 minutes, the room filled with the sound of pencils scratching paper. Bradley Davis, the teaching assistant, walked up and down the aisles, performatively sighing at everyone's work. "Classic Wilson," he said, loud enough for his favorite student to hear. "This one destroys them every year." He did not look at Naomi once. He walked past her like she was furniture. Naomi did not pick up her pencil. She did not open her notebook. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes tracking the board from left to right, then right to left, then back again. She tilted her head slightly. Somewhere in a pocket on the other side of the room, a graduate student's phone began to record video without its owner knowing. A red dot blinked silently in the fabric of a backpack. At the 12-minute mark, Professor Wilson, enjoying his audience, stopped beside Naomi's desk. "Still dreaming, little one? The board is up there, not on the ceiling." A few students smirked. And then Naomi Young raised her hand. It was a small hand. It was a steady hand. Professor Wilson blinked. Oh, please, by all means, enlighten us." Naomi stood up. The top of her head barely reached the desk in front of her. She walked to the front of the room, and she did not pick up the chalk. Naomi stood in front of the long green chalkboard. She was too short for it. She studied the problem the way a cat studies a room before walking into it. She was not frightened. She was reading. Then she spoke. Her voice was small, but clear enough to carry to the back row. "Sir, before I try to solve it, there is something on the board that isn't right." Professor Wilson's smile froze in place. "I beg your pardon?" Naomi pointed with one finger at the piecewise function, halfway up the board. "The condition for the second case. You wrote x greater than or equal to 0. But the constraint at the bottom, the one you wrote at the end, already says x cannot equal 0. So the or equal to part does nothing. It's sloppy." A single graduate student in the second row leaned forward, squinted, and then quietly muttered a word under her breath that could not be repeated on camera. Professor Wilson's jaw tightened. "A stylistic preference. It does not affect the problem." "No, sir, it doesn't," Naomi agreed. Her tone was polite. "But this does." Her finger moved up to the upper bound of the big summation sign at the top of the problem. "You wrote n here, with no restriction on n, but in the original version of this problem, the one printed in the Annals Problem section in 1991, the upper bound was n minus 1. Without that minus 1, the last term in the sum breaks the symmetry that the whole problem is built on. The problem, as you wrote it on the board, isn't unsolvable. It's just broken. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest. Professor Wilson turned slowly, as if his neck hurt. "You read the Annals of Mathematics." "My father read them, sir," Naomi said. "I read his notes." In the back row, Professor Eleanor Anderson raised her eyebrows and slowly uncapped a pen. Two graduate students glanced at each other. A third, in the fifth row, quietly forwarded a text message to a friend that read, "Get over to Hall B, now." Rosalind Young pressed her hand to her mouth. Bradley Davis, at the front, was very still. Professor Wilson recovered. He always did. That was the thing about him. Even granting, for the sake of argument, that there may be a transcription issue, the problem remains effectively unsolvable in the time allotted. Which is my point. Please return to your seat, little one. Naomi did not move. "May I try? With the correction?" Wilson smiled like a wolf smiles. "Of course. By all means. 1 minute. Use the chalk. And show your work." She reached up. The chalk tray was too high. She had to stand on her toes to get a piece of chalk. Bradley Davis laughed quietly. Nobody joined him this time. Naomi Young rewrote the problem on the clean side of the board, with the correction applied. She did it neatly, in handwriting far too small for the back rows to read clearly. Then she drew a small circle around two terms. They were, once the correction was in place, mirror images of each other. Here is what she did, in the simplest possible terms. She did not do magic. She did not invent anything new. She did 4 small things that anybody watching could follow, even if they could not have done them. First, she noticed that the corrected problem had a hidden mirror. 2 halves that, when folded over the middle, matched each other exactly. This kind of mirror is what mathematicians call symmetry. Second, she used the mirror to do a trick. When you add 2 mirrored halves together, the messy middle cancels itself out. It's like 2 waves hitting each other from opposite directions and flattening into still water. Third, because the messy middle canceled, the problem that had looked like it would need pages and pages of work collapsed into a single clean expression. Fourth, she calculated the clean expression. It came out to a small, tidy whole number. She boxed the number on the board. 4. She put the chalk back on the tray. She had to stretch to do it. And when she turned around to face the room, the clock on the wall showed that 30 seconds had passed. 30 seconds. Nobody moved. The silence that followed was not like the silence before. The silence before had been the weight of difficulty. This silence was the weight of something collapsing inside the room. It was the silence of a belief shattering in real time. Somewhere in the third row, a pen fell and rolled. Then, from the front, one student began to clap. Her name was Hannah Taylor. Slow, deliberate, one clap at a time. Professor Wilson held up his hand to stop her. She did not stop. 3 more students joined her. Wilson's hand stayed up for another second, and then he dropped it. It made no difference. He spoke over the clapping, louder than he should have. A parlor trick. She has seen this problem before. She memorized the solution. That is not mathematics. That is performance. The clapping stopped. The room waited. Naomi Young looked up at him. She was small. She was calm. "Sir," she said, "I have never seen this problem before. I only saw it on the board." Somewhere in the back of the room, a phone camera that had been recording quietly saved the clip and uploaded it automatically to the cloud. It would be watched, eventually, by 43 million people. But nobody in the room knew that yet. Rosalind Young was crying silently. Professor Anderson was writing something in her notebook, and Professor Harrison Wilson stood in front of a board that no longer belonged to him, trying to figure out what to do next. So what does a man do when a 10-year-old breaks his 32-year record in 30 seconds? He doesn't apologize. He doubles down. Professor Wilson turned away from Naomi. He turned toward the class. He spread his hands in the way politicians do when they need to control a room that is slipping out from under them. "Class, what we have just witnessed is, yes, impressive in its way. A child with a good memory who has, apparently, been coached to recognize a specific published problem. Commendable. Her father, I am told, was a minor mathematician." He paused on the word minor. He let it sit in the air. But the true test of a mathematician is not recognition. It is creation. Under pressure. In front of one's peers. He turned back to Naomi. She had not moved from the front of the room. "Young lady, you will stay. The rest of you are free to go. I have a second problem. One I have never published. One I wrote last night, in my kitchen, with a glass of wine. Nobody on earth has seen it before. Let us see how you handle it." Nobody left the room. Word had already spread into the hallway. Students from 2 other seminars were now crowding at the doors. Phones were openly recording. Somebody in the 3rd row was live streaming to a small audience that was growing by the second. Rosalind Young started to stand a second time. Professor Anderson caught her eye across the room and gave one small shake of her head. "Wait, not yet." "Harrison," Professor Anderson said, her voice rising from the back. "This is not necessary. She is 10 years old." Wilson did not look at her. "Eleanor, if she belongs in this room, then this is trivial for her. If she does not, better we find out now than 3 years from now in somebody's dissertation defense. I am doing her a favor." Professor Anderson did not press. She stayed. She was watching him the way a scientist watches an experiment that has gone interesting. Wilson wrote the new problem. It was uglier than the first. It had no hidden symmetry. It had no shortcut from any published paper. It was, by any honest standard, a genuinely hard problem. He gave her 10 minutes. Naomi did not look at her mother. She did not look at Professor Anderson. She walked back to the board. She picked up the chalk again, and she got to work. She was not fast this time. The camera that was still rolling caught her hand tremble, just once, at the 3-minute mark. She steadied it. She crossed out 2 lines. She started over. At the 8-minute mark, she stopped completely. She stood perfectly still. The room held its breath. "Tick-tock, little one," said Professor Wilson. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She wrote 2 more lines. She stopped again. And then, in the final 15 seconds, something changed in her posture. She wrote quickly, without pausing. She underlined the answer twice. She set the chalk back on the tray. She stepped away. Professor Wilson walked up to the board. He studied it. He studied it for a long time. His face did several small things. None of them were pleasant to watch. "Correct," he said finally. "In form. The method, of course, is unorthodox, even crude. A real mathematician would have approached this through—" "Professor Wilson!" The voice came from the front row. It was Hannah Taylor, the student who had started the clapping. She was not shouting. Her voice was calm. "She got the right answer, in 10 minutes, on a problem you wrote yourself last night. She is 10 years old. At what point does she stop being a trick and start being a student? Wilson's head turned toward her so fast his glasses slipped. The room went still again. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted. The students were not laughing anymore. Not one of them. The phones were all recording, every single one. Naomi walked back to her seat. She sat down. She opened her father's notebook, just a crack, just enough to look at one page. Then she closed it. Her mother, in the back row, wiped her face with the back of her hand. Professor Wilson turned to the camera that he knew was filming the official Harvard lecture archive. He smoothed his tie. He spoke slowly, for the record. Very well. Since the matter has, apparently, become a public one, I propose, with the dean's permission, a formal demonstration. Monday morning, Sanders Theater. 3 problems, 3 judges, live streamed. We will see, under proper conditions, whether this performance can be repeated. If she solves at least 2 of the 3, Harvard will have its newest prodigy. If she cannot, this young scholars program will, regrettably, be exposed as the well-meaning but misguided experiment that I have long suspected it is. He turned back to Naomi. His voice dropped, just a little. It was almost gentle, the way a trap is almost gentle. Young lady, shall we say Monday, 9 o'clock? Naomi Young looked up at him. She was 10 years old. Her feet did not touch the floor under her chair. Yes, sir, she said. Listen, I gotta stop right here. A grown man, a tenured professor, 64 years old, looking a 10-year-old kid in the eye and setting a trap he thinks she can't walk out of. Tell me you're not squeezing your phone right now. Tell me your chest isn't tight. Because mine is. And we haven't even gotten to the part where he finds out who her daddy was. By Friday afternoon, the clip from Hall B had left Harvard's campus. A phone video, shaky and vertical, had been posted to a social media account that nobody had ever heard of. By 6 o'clock that evening, it had 700,000 views. By midnight, it had 4 million. The headline most outlets settled on was the one that fit in a thumbnail. Harvard professor mocks black child. Child destroys him in 30 seconds. By Saturday morning, the story was on the front page of the Boston Globe. By Saturday afternoon, the Harvard Office of Communications had released a statement that managed to say nothing in 3 paragraphs. By Sunday, the Sanders Theater live stream had 200,000 people pre-registered. A national morning show had already reserved a segment, and in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building in Dorchester, a 10-year-old girl was trying to finish her weekend homework on fractions. Rosalind Young did not let her daughter see the internet that weekend. She did not let her see the news. She did not let her see the blog post that appeared on Saturday night under a pseudonym, written by someone whose writing cadence resembled Bradley Davis's suspiciously closely. The post was titled, "When Harvard Trades Standards for Optics," and it suggested, without naming her, that the 10-year-old child at the center of the story was an embarrassing stunt. The post was shared 40,000 times before Harvard's lawyers quietly asked the hosting site to take it down. It stayed up long enough to do its work. Rosalind Young, in the kitchen that Saturday, made her daughter pancakes. She let her watch cartoons. She hid her own phone in a drawer under the silverware. She called in sick for her Sunday night shift for the first time in 3 years. When her sister phoned from Atlanta, crying, asking if Naomi had seen the internet yet, Rosalind said, quietly, that no, her daughter was 10 years old, and she would not let a nation full of strangers be the first voice in her daughter's head that weekend. Then she made grilled cheese for lunch. She cut the crusts off. What Rosalind did let her daughter see was Professor Eleanor Anderson, who came to the apartment on Saturday afternoon carrying a thin folder and a box of pastries from a bakery near the campus. She sat at the small kitchen table. She did not offer to coach. I have been the chair of this department for 22 years, Naomi. I keep records. Professor Wilson does not know I keep them. This folder contains every problem he has ever used in his Friday ritual. I am not going to tell you how to win on Monday. I am going to tell you that he has a pattern. There is something he values that makes a solution, in his eyes, elegant. Find out what it is, and then you decide whether you want to give him what he wants or what the problem actually wants. Naomi nodded. She took the folder. Professor Anderson stood up. At the kitchen door, she stopped. She did not look back at Naomi. She looked at Rosalind. I have to tell you something. I have been thinking about whether to tell you this since Friday afternoon. Your husband, Nathaniel Young. I remember him. He applied to our doctoral program in the fall of 1998. I was on the admissions committee. His application was the strongest in his cohort by a wide margin. The committee voted to reject him. The lead voice on that rejection was a junior faculty member named Harrison Wilson. The reason Wilson put in the file was, quote, "The applicant's mathematical style is inconsistent with the expectations of this department. I argued against it. I lost by 1 vote. Your husband is the reason I started the Young Scholars Program 3 years later. I'm sorry, Rosalind. I should have told you sooner." Rosalind Young sat at her own kitchen table and cried without making a sound. Naomi did not cry. She opened her father's notebook for the first time in front of another person. She turned to a specific page near the back. She traced her fingers over her father's handwriting, and then, quietly, she spoke. "Papa," she said, to nobody in the room, "I see you." Sunday came on fast. Naomi spent the morning in the Boston Public Library with Hannah Taylor, who had appeared at the apartment unannounced at 6 a.m. with 2 coffees and an armful of problem sets. "I'm not coaching you," Hannah said, setting the coffees down. "I'm just bored and I like math." Naomi let her stay. Together they studied the folder Professor Anderson had left. They found the pattern. Wilson loved solutions that used complex analysis, where real analysis would have done the job more simply. He loved technique that looked hard. He rewarded show. He gave less credit to solutions that were, in the old-fashioned sense, obvious. Hannah wrote in pencil on a legal pad. Naomi worked in her father's notebook. At 2 in the afternoon, Rosalind brought them sandwiches. By 4 o'clock, Naomi had stopped working. She was staring out the window at the dome of the library. "Hannah," she said, "I don't think I'm supposed to play his game." Hannah put down her pencil. "What do you mean?" "If I give him what he wants, he wins even when I win. Because he gets to say, 'See, she learned to think like us.' If I give him what the problem wants, I might lose, but I'll still be me." Hannah Taylor looked at a 10-year-old girl for a long moment. Then she said, "Your father sounds like he was a really good teacher." Naomi smiled, just a little. He was. Meanwhile, across the river in Cambridge, Professor Harrison Wilson was not sleeping well. He had spent the weekend rehearsing his opening remarks in front of his bathroom mirror. He had called the dean twice, trying to tighten the rules. He had called Bradley Davis 3 times, asking about damage control on social media. He had, at one point on Sunday night, opened the bottom drawer of his desk and looked at a thin manila folder he had not looked at in 25 years. The label on the folder read, in his own handwriting, Young, N. He closed it. He did not know that his oldest mentor in the field, a retired faculty member named Marion Williams, had, the previous morning, walked to the Harvard post office with a sealed envelope and mailed it to the office of Dean Margaret Johnson. He did not know that on Friday afternoon, a flight from Paris had landed at Logan Airport, and a distinguished mathematician in a charcoal gray overcoat had taken a taxi straight to the Harvard campus, where he had quietly sat in the back of a graduate seminar for reasons of his own. He did not know any of this yet. He only knew that on Monday morning, in front of a live stream audience that had now crossed 400,000 pre-registrations, he was going to face a 10-year-old black girl whom he had, in his own mind, already measured and dismissed. And he knew he could not afford to be wrong again. Sunday night, at her bedroom window in Dorchester, Naomi Young closed her father's notebook. She folded a small letter and put it in the inside pocket of her blazer. Rosalind did not ask what the letter said. Naomi did not tell her. The bus to Cambridge left at 7 in the morning. Who exactly was waiting in the back of Sanders Theater when she walked in? Sanders Theater on Monday morning did not look like a university lecture hall. It looked like a cathedral that had been converted into a courtroom. The chairs were full. The balcony was full. The aisles were full. Television trucks with satellite dishes lined the street outside. The air was warm with bodies and cold with expectation. Naomi walked down the center aisle, holding her mother's hand. She was wearing a navy blazer over the same pink sweater from Friday. She had chosen it herself. She had explained to her mother that she wanted them to see the sweater again and remember. Rosalind did not argue. Dean Margaret Johnson opened the morning with a short, careful speech. She thanked the audience. She thanked Harvard. She explained the rules again for the live stream. And then she came to her last announcement. Our third judge this morning, joining us on short notice and at considerable personal inconvenience, is a distinguished colleague visiting from the Collège de France. He is a recipient of the 2018 Fields Medal. Please welcome Dr. Gregory Moore. There was a small gasp from the math departments in the audience. There was a larger gasp from the judges' table. Professor Harrison Wilson's face did a small, tight thing. He had not been told. He had not been asked. Gregory Moore walked onto the stage in the same charcoal gray overcoat. He nodded to the audience. He nodded, very briefly, toward Naomi. It was a nod she did not return because she did not have to. Her mother, next to her, looked between the Fields medalist and her daughter with an expression that said, "You knew him?" Dr. Moore took the microphone. He was polite. He was brief. I will keep this short. I have reviewed Professor Wilson's 3 problems. They are excellent. I would like, with the dean's permission, to add a 4th, a tiebreaker, one of my own choosing. The winner of today's demonstration must also solve mine. I believe that is fair. Dean Johnson approved it before Professor Wilson could open his mouth. Harrison Wilson's jaw clenched so hard the microphone on his lapel picked it up. He did not know what problem Gregory Moore was going to choose. Nobody did. And just like that, every preparation Professor Anderson had given Naomi was worth half of what it had been worth the night before. There was no pattern for Gregory Moore. There was no folder. There was only whatever he had carried in his head from Paris. Naomi Young reached into her bag. She pulled out her father's leather notebook. She placed it on the desk in front of her. She opened it. It was the first time she had opened it in a public room full of people. She did not flinch. What was Dr. Moore about to write on that board? Problem 1 was given first. Naomi solved it cleanly in 14 minutes. Her solution was elegant, direct, and quiet, which is to say, it was nothing like what Professor Wilson considered elegant. Dr. Moore nodded without changing his expression. Professor Anderson wrote something in her notebook and smiled. Professor Wilson scored it, and his voice through the microphone said, grudgingly, adequate. 1 for 1. Problem 2 was given second, and problem 2 was where it all nearly ended. Halfway through the 20 minutes, Naomi wrote a line on her paper. She paused. She crossed it out. She wrote another line. She paused longer. The camera, projecting her work onto the huge screen behind her, caught every second of it. Bradley Davis, in the front row, allowed himself a small, visible smile. 5 minutes in, she realized what she had done. She had been chasing the wrong approach. She had been playing Harrison Wilson's game. She had reached, instinctively, for complex analysis, the kind of heavy machinery Wilson rewarded, instead of trusting the lighter tools her father had taught her. She had put on borrowed shoes, and they did not fit. By the time she realized it, she had burned through her time. She tried to pivot. She started over. She rewrote 3 lines. The clock hit 0. The work on her page was not wrong. It was not complete. I am afraid, said Professor Wilson, in a voice that was almost gentle, which made it worse, that this solution is incomplete. No credit. The audience murmured. Somewhere in the balcony, an audible voice said, "She's just a little kid at the end of the day." Someone else, quieter, said, "Told you." Bradley Davis did not hide his smile anymore. Naomi's face, on the enormous screen behind her, went very still. She did not cry. She wanted to. Her lower lip trembled one time, and then she stopped it. She turned, just slightly, toward the back of the theater, where her mother was standing in the aisle. Rosalind did not sit. She stood. She put her right hand flat against her heart, and she gave one small, firm nod. It was a nod that said nothing in words, and everything in every language mothers speak. Naomi turned back. She sat down in the little chair at the contestant's desk. She put her hands in her lap. She did not look at Bradley Davis, who was leaning over to whisper something to the student beside him. During the 5-minute break that followed, something happened that would only be noticed later, when people studied the live stream frame by frame. Professor Eleanor Anderson walked slowly across the stage, carrying a small paper cup of water and a plain butter cookie. She set them on Naomi's desk without a word. She walked away. She did not make it into the famous YouTube clips. But Naomi saw her. And then Dr. Gregory Moore, on his way back to the judges' table, stopped near Naomi's desk. He did not look at her. He addressed the floor. "Your father taught you a technique. You were 4 years old. You could not hold a pencil properly yet. He wrote it down for you, in the notebook on your desk, on a page near the back. I have been waiting 30 years to see someone use that technique inside this building. Do not waste it on Professor Wilson's problems. Wait for mine." He walked on. Naomi looked down at her father's notebook. She turned to a specific page near the back. There was a single equation there, in her father's careful handwriting. Next to it, in the margin, he had written, in pencil, a line addressed to her. "For Naomi. When nothing else works, try this. Love, Papa." She closed the notebook. She put her hand on the cover. She sat very still. And when the bell rang to signal problem 3, she stood up. So how do you come back from a public failure when you are 10 years old and the whole country is watching? Problem 3 was Wilson's last chance. He had written it himself, over the weekend, specifically for this moment. He had designed it to humiliate. It was a nasty, twisting problem in a subfield she was unlikely to have studied. He had been told by his own colleagues that it was, in their opinion, too hard for a graduate qualifying exam. Naomi Young solved it in 19 minutes. Her solution was not flashy. It was not fast. It used exactly the tools her father had written about in the early chapters of his notebook. It was, in the old-fashioned sense, beautiful. Dr. Moore nodded. Professor Anderson closed her eyes and exhaled. Professor Wilson, after a long look at the board, said one word into the microphone, and this time he did not soften it. Correct. 2 of 3. She had made the threshold. Under the original rules, the demonstration was over. She had won. But Dr. Moore's tiebreaker still remained. And everyone in the theater understood that the tiebreaker was not really about the rules anymore. The tiebreaker was about something much older than that. Dr. Gregory Moore walked to the board. He picked up a piece of chalk, and he began to write, slowly, deliberately, in a handwriting that looked older than his years. The notation he used was unusual. It was the kind of notation mathematicians had used in the 1970s and had mostly abandoned. Some of the students in the balcony leaned forward. 1 or 2 of the older faculty members in the front rows went very still. Professor Harrison Wilson, watching him write, went a shade of gray that had not previously been on his face. Dr. Moore finished writing. He put down the chalk. He turned to the audience. He did not raise his voice. This problem was first posed at a Harvard graduate seminar in the spring semester of 1998. It was posed by a doctoral applicant who was, at that time, being reviewed by the admissions committee. The applicant was never offered a place in the program. His work was not permitted to be published under Harvard's name. The problem, therefore, has been effectively invisible for 28 years. It has also, to my knowledge, never been solved. Miss Young, you have 20 minutes. The audience did not murmur. The audience did not breathe. Because the people in the front rows who knew the story were starting to understand what was about to happen. And Harrison Wilson, sitting at the judges' table, could no longer hear what Dr. Moore was saying. His ears were ringing. Naomi Young walked to the board. She carried her father's leather notebook with her. She set it on the lectern. The stage technician, who had been briefed quickly by Professor Anderson during the break, adjusted the overhead camera so that the pages of the notebook projected onto the enormous screen behind the stage. The audience could now see, in enormous high definition, the page of notes her father had written for her 27 years ago. The note in the margin was visible to everyone in the theater. For Naomi. When nothing else works, try this. Love, Papa. Naomi did not announce herself. She just began. Here is what she did, in the plainest possible language. She did not pull a rabbit out of a hat. She did 4 things that any careful person with patience could follow. First, she replaced the strange, ugly expression on the board with a different notation, the specific notation her father had written in the margin of his notebook. This is called a substitution. It is the same kind of move a cook makes when they realize a recipe will work better in a different pan. Second, once the substitution was in place, a mirror appeared. Not a perfect one, like the first problem, a deeper one. The kind of mirror you only see when you have rewritten the problem in exactly the right language. Third, she used that mirror the same way she had used the first one. 2 huge, ugly terms canceled each other out. What had looked impossible collapsed into a short chain of ordinary steps. Fourth, she finished with a 2-line argument that any second-year graduate student could, with effort, follow. She circled her answer. She stepped back. 16 minutes. She set the chalk on the tray. The silence in Sanders' theater lasted 5 full seconds. It was the kind of silence that does not record well on camera, because microphones pick up something, however small. This silence picked up nothing. Dr. Gregory Moore stood up. He walked to the board. He looked at her solution. He turned to the audience. Correct. He paused. Then he said the thing he had come from Paris to say. I should like to note, for the record, that the substitution Miss Young used was first devised by Nathaniel Young in the fall of 1998, while he was an applicant to this department. It is, in my professional opinion, one of the most elegant pieces of mathematical thought I have seen in the last 30 years. It has never been credited to him. It does, however, bear a striking resemblance to a substitution published 3 years later in a paper by a tenured faculty member of this institution. He did not say Wilson's name. He did not have to. It was then that Naomi Young, at the board, spoke for the first time in the entire demonstration. Her voice was soft. It was not angry. It was the voice of a child who has waited a long time for one question. Professor Wilson, your paper in 2001, on page 63, lemma 3.2, you attribute the central substitution, and I am quoting you, to an unpublished note from a graduate applicant. You never named him. Why? Wilson opened his mouth. There were conventions at the time. Applicants who were not admitted were not. Hannah Taylor stood up in the audience. She held up her phone. She read aloud. From the Harvard Faculty Handbook, 1998, page 4, quote, all scholarly contributions, regardless of the contributor's enrollment status, shall be credited by name. End quote. Professor Wilson. I looked it up. The audience made a sound that was not laughter and not applause. It was the sound of hundreds of people understanding something at the same time. Harrison Wilson stood slowly. He pulled the microphone on his lapel off with shaking fingers. I was wrong, he said, about the attribution, and about the child. He did not look at Naomi. Naomi Young closed her father's notebook. She picked it up. She walked off the stage. Her mother was waiting for her at the bottom of the aisle, arms open. And at the bottom of that aisle, after 3 days of not crying, Naomi Young finally did. The standing ovation lasted 11 minutes. She did not turn around for any of it. I gotta be straight with you. I almost couldn't finish writing this one. Because every kid I grew up with, the ones who were too smart for the room they were in, nobody ever sent a Fields medalist across an ocean to stand up for them. And that's the part that's going to sit on my chest long after the clip goes dark. So if this story is hitting somewhere quiet, Don't shake it off. Sit in it. That's where it changes you. 1 week later, the live stream had been viewed 43 million times. Clips from Sanders Theater had run on every major network. The New York Times had published a long editorial. The Atlantic had published a longer one. A 10-year-old black girl from Dorchester was on the cover of a Sunday magazine, holding her father's notebook, looking straight at the camera without smiling. On a Tuesday morning, Dean Margaret Johnson arrived at her office to find a sealed package on her desk. It had been hand-delivered the day before by a woman named Professor Marion Williams. Professor Williams was 91 years old. She had retired from the Harvard mathematics faculty in 1996, and she had for almost 3 decades kept a file she had never been asked to produce. Inside the package were letters. Letters Nathaniel Young had written to the admissions committee in the fall of 1998, appealing his rejection. The committee's denials were also in the file. Each denial was signed. Several of them were signed by a junior faculty member named Harrison Wilson. Wilson had voted to reject Nathaniel Young's application, twice. In the internal note attached to the second rejection, he had written, in his own handwriting, the following: "Applicant has skill, but lacks the temperament suitable for our field." The letters became public on Friday. The Harvard Gazette ran them in full. Nobody at Harvard tried to stop it, because by that point, nobody at Harvard wanted to. The department issued a formal statement on Monday. They posthumously awarded Nathaniel Young an honorary doctorate in mathematics. They created a new fellowship in his name, funded at $600,000 a year, open exclusively to students from underserved schools pursuing advanced study in the sciences. They named a seminar room after him on the second floor of the Science Center, with a small brass plaque next to the door. The plaque says, "Nathaniel Young, mathematician, teacher, father, 1965 to 2002. Professor Harrison Wilson released a public letter of apology. It was co-signed with a request to be allowed to make the first private donation to the Nathaniel Young Fellowship in the amount of $250,000. The letter was understood, by everyone who read it, to have been written under considerable pressure. What did Naomi Young do 1 week later, on a Friday evening in Dorchester? She did her homework. Fractions. She sat at the small kitchen table in the apartment in Dorchester, with a bowl of cereal and a yellow pencil that had almost certainly been the same pencil from that first Friday morning in Hall B. Her father's notebook sat on a shelf in the living room, now in a glass display case her mother had bought at a second-hand store and cleaned by hand. The phone rang. Rosalind answered it. She listened for a moment, and then she walked the phone over to the kitchen table and handed it to her daughter. Professor Anderson's voice was warm on the other end. "Naomi, they would like to name a seminar room after your father. The ceremony is next month. They would like you to give the opening remarks." Naomi thought about it. She was chewing a spoonful of cereal. "I am only 10. "Yes," said Professor Anderson. "And?" Naomi smiled, just a little. It was the first real smile of the whole story. "I will be there," she said. Naomi Young graduated from high school at 15. She went to MIT, her father's school. She earned her doctorate in mathematics at 20, under the supervision of Dr. Gregory Moore. Her father's photograph sat on her desk for every oral exam she ever took. Professor Harrison Wilson retired at the end of that same spring. In the department's annual report, his endowed chair was quietly renamed the Nathaniel Young Chair in Analytical Methods. He did not attend the renaming ceremony. He did not, as far as anyone knows, attend any university ceremony after that. The Nathaniel Young Fellowship, in its first 5 years, admitted 43 students. 21 of them now hold faculty positions at institutions around the world. Every one of them had been told at some point before Harvard that they did not belong. Nathaniel Young never saw his name on a Harvard door, but his method did. His daughter did. And the room that once told him to sit down now stands up every year when his name is read aloud. If this story moved you, do one thing for me. Tell me in the comments about a time somebody underestimated you. Share this with the child who needs to hear it. And hit subscribe. We tell one of these every week, because there is always another Naomi, and there is always another room.